I'm Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster, and I'm pleased to be here at Hannibal TV. And this is my second episode of the Taskmaster Speaks.
And I'm back here with Kevin Sullivan, the Taskmaster, former WCW booker, wrestling legend, Florida booker. And this is the part 2 interview, so it's going to be a little all over the place. The questions aren't really going to be in order, but thank you for joining us again.
It's great to be here, Hannibal. You run one of the best television networks for wrestling, and if people out there watching this for the first time, you've been missing out on a lot, but I hear that Hannibal has a backlog of this, and you can watch anything that he has.
Yeah, so anyone that is watching this and didn't see the first one, it's out there free right now. You can look it up, Kevin Sullivan full shoot interview. It's over 3 hours and it's a very detailed account of his career. So this interview, we're going to follow up with some fan questions and some other questions I had for Kevin. So we'll start off with the topic of Jinder Mahal. A lot of people commented on your video about Jinder that you were proven wrong, I guess, about Jinder Mahal with the way the WWE handled him.
I haven't been proven wrong yet. They just went to Saudi Arabia. Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't he win over in Saudi Arabia?
I don't watch the product, and I
okay, he won.
Yeah,
okay, here's the thing. The United States is 350 million people that we know of. I just looked this up. In India, there's 1,400,000,000. So you're talking about 1,050,000,000 more people. How do you not do this with Jinder Mahal? And I saw where they put out the map where they're going. They're going to the Pacific Rim, which is now exploding financially. India, with the tech support groups they have over there, and Apple is opening up an office over there, and they're going into China with over 1 billion people. India and China switch every month who has the largest population. The other thing that people don't understand that have never been there, and I've been there quite a lot, is Indonesia's the 3rd most populated spot in the world. Going to Saudi Arabia, I would love to know how much they got paid for that show. Eventually they're going to tell their stockholders how much they got paid. We're going to see a transfer of power and wealth to that part of the world. It's happened already, but we're going to see. Now the prince they have now just allowed women to drive cars in June. I was there 12 years ago when a woman couldn't even go in the front seat of the car. Hannibal, when I was there, they brought us to a huge, it would be like a Nordstrom's, and every woman salesperson had to leave the building while the pro wrestlers were in there. So they didn't have movies for over 60 years. They're opening 150 movies, theaters as we speak. There was a private dinner in LA 2 months ago where The Rock was there. Rock is going to get his fingers in that pie. So you have them going to Indonesia, the 3rd most populated. The 1st most populated is India, and probably China next. We're not even talking about Pakistan. There's money to be made, and Jinder is going to prove me right before this is all over.
Right, so those people are just jumping the gun on that. They say because Triple H beat him in India. And also, I read the results of that and I found it a little kind of disgusting as like an old school wrestling fan, that I guess Triple H beat him, then they shook hands, then him, Triple H, and his two managers,
yeah.
they all danced. They all did an Indian dance in the ring.
Yeah, I know that's hard for us to understand, but that's been going on forever, Hannibal. I wrestled in India one time, and this is very early in my career, when Dara Singh, and you guys maybe remember Dara Singh, Canadians maybe remember Dara Singh, because Dara Singh wrestled Lou Thez in Toronto and Montreal for an hour. He also wrestled Whipper Watson. He wrestled every top guy in Canada. And the reason why he didn't stay, he was the Rock before Rock. He made action movies. Then he became a huge producer, and his son is still a producer. And if you read Lou Thesz's book, The Hooker, one of the few guys he puts over is Dara Singh. I was on a card where Dara Singh wrestled, and it was in New Delhi, and they drew 150,000 people to a outside stadium. But people don't realize wrestling has been the national sport in India since India's been formed.
Now, with the death of Bruno Sammartino, would you mind talking about him a bit? And
Yeah. If I was back in Bruno's heyday, I was there when he had his second run. And if I was from another planet and landed, and I've seen all the champions from Thez. I didn't see him when he was champion, but I had the pleasure of being a six-man tag with him one time with Jersey Joe Walcott as a special referee who was the world heavyweight boxing champion. I've seen Briscoe, I've seen Funk, both Funks, I've seen Harley, I've seen Record Course, Steamboat, on and on and on. And like I said, if I had landed in the world and the first time I went to a wrestling match, I would know Bruno was a world champion. The way he carried himself, the way he looked, he was the epitome of what a wrestler should look like. You know, you train constantly, he was, and you know how people exaggerate what they can lift. Bruno did a 560-pound bench press back in the day, no wraps, no suit, nothing. So with a suit and wraps, I would say he would have done 700 pounds. He had, a lot of people knocked Bruno's wrestling ability. I saw him have a match one time on TV with Baron Cicluna when Baron's career was winding down, and they did back in the day a Southern style match with high spots, arm drags, very little healing from Cicluna, and they went about 15 minutes on TV, which was a rarity for Bruno to wrestle on TV. And when Bruno made a comeback, he made a comeback. I just read something that I almost questioned the validity of it. He sold out the Gardens 180 times. That's something to say. And all the length of time that he held the title, it was over 4,000 days. I mean, he was a special athlete. And people say, well, he only drew in the Northeast. That's crazy, because he went to San Francisco when Ray Stevens was red hot, and he wrestled. They did a great angle. He wrestled Ray Stevens. And Ray was the U.S. champion out there. And Ray beat him on a countout. And the thing was, in California at the time, in Shire's territory, if you got counted out of the ring, you lost. So technically, Ray Stevens was the WWWF champion for a moment, until the WWWF came down and said your title doesn't change on a countout or disqualification. He also went to Montreal, and Killer Kowalski was a dear friend of mine. Kowalski told me that Bruno put him over in the middle of the ring. This was between Bruno's run as champion. So people saying that he didn't do jobs is not true. He also made All Japan Wrestling with Baba. He was a very close friend of Baba. He went over there, they did 60 minutes numerous times. And you being the athlete you are, 60 minutes is a long time. And with a guy like Baba, it's even longer. And that's no discredit to Baba, because Baba was at the tail end of his career, or at least he was on the downslide. And Bruno made All Japan Wrestling.
Did you see the Andre the Giant documentary?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of it, and could you tell us one of your experiences with Andre?
I have no memorabilia in wrestling in my man cave. If you come, it's all baseball and football. I have baseball cards in glass cases from 1946 to 52 Bowmans. I have the Boston Braves on one wall, and I have pennants. And my daughter bought me shadow box pennants and pins when the Braves won the 1948 pennant. It should have been an all Boston series. The first playoffs ever in baseball were the Cleveland Indians against the Boston Red Sox, a one-game series, so the Red Sox blew the game. I have Sports Illustrated covers from the Patriots' first 4 Super Bowls, the Red Sox 3 championships during this era, and the Bruins winning 1 and the Celtics winning 1. I have part of center field wall. I have part of the Fisk Bowl. I have part of the Johnny Pesky Bowl. So I have football cards, and basically they're the Chicago Cardinals. I see a Cardinal hat on when they're in Chicago. The only picture I have that pertains, and I have a picture of Ali and myself, and the only other picture I have is Andre holding me and my brother up outside of an Italian restaurant in East Boston, and we're sitting in his hands like babies. Andre was such a cool guy to me that he was off the next day, and he drove 90 miles with me each way to a little town called Grafton, East Grafton, New Hampshire, and he went into my nephew's classes when they were in the 3rd and 5th grade for a show and tell. They brought a giant into the class. He didn't have to do that. He was a real good guy. And this gets me a lot about these wrestling historians, Hannibal, because none of them were actually there, so they're only statistics that they're giving you. I was there in a lot of big meetings. I was there, so I know Andre the Giant. He was very kind to me when he came to Florida. I didn't realize how much I wrestled him till after that special, and I looked up. Every time he came to Florida, I wrestled him in a tag match in the small towns with Buzz Sawyer, and him and Dusty against me and Buzz, and we wrestled him in Tampa in the big building, and I wrestled him in singles in Orlando, and I wrestled him in a lower stadium where they drew 30,000 people. The main event was Andre Mosca and Steve Collins against Bundy, me, and Mark Lewin. So Andre was very kind to me, very good to me, and I don't think they delved into what a wonderful human being he is. And one of the things he said to me and my brother, because we rented a big car for him because my brother had a big pickup truck. And my brother said, "Oh, it must be great being a giant." He said, "Hey, do you know how hard it is, like they said, to find a bed, to find a, just anything, sitting in a chair." When he got to my brother's house, my brother gave him a can of beer, and my brother looked, and he said to his wife, he said, "Janet, did you get miniature beers?" Because that was the craze back then where they were selling the 5-ounce cans of beers. She said, "No, that's a 16-ounce beer. You couldn't see it in his hand." And this is maybe risque, but Terry Funk one time in the dressing room looked over at Andre's hands and he said, "Boy, he could ruin people with those fingers, couldn't he?" I mean, the thing about Gene putting the ring on, the 3 fingers, that's true. I did it also. Andre was a man among men, and he was very gracious to Hogan to do that. And I don't think wrestling would have exploded the way it did if Andre didn't do that.
I had some fans who watched the last shoot interview ask me if you could talk some more about Mark Lewin in greater detail and the idea of the beach promo that's now famous. And me personally, I'm wondering if you could tell that story of him and the bikers as well.
Yeah, Mark was a unique person. At 16 years old, Vince Sr. put him, before he went with Curtis, he was Rocker's tag team partner sometimes. This is back in '53. Mickey Mantle was making $17,000 a year. Mark made $123,000. Mark was a genius. He doesn't get credit for it because his huge success was overseas. Him and Barnett lit Australia up. It was a forerunner to what Vince did. They were national. They flew everywhere. The planes would actually be delayed sometimes so the guys could make it from TV to get in the planes. Then they ran Australia, they ran Hong Kong, they ran New Zealand, they ran Malaysia, and this is now, that was in the late 60s, early 70s, and now Vince is repeating history. He's gone over there and doing it. I don't think if Mark didn't lay down the foundation of what pro wrestling should be with Barnett, they wouldn't be able to walk in and do what they did. Mark wrestled in India in front of 100,000 people numerous times. Him against Dara Singh, and I mentioned to you earlier, Dara Singh was The Rock before The Rock in India, Bollywood. He became a action star, then he became a Hollywood producer, but he came to Canada for a while, Montreal and Toronto, and wrestled Luthez to a 60-minute draw numerous times. He wrestled Billy Watson. Anybody that was anybody in Canada or North America, Dara Singh wrestled, but he couldn't stay because his film obligations. Dara Singh was another guy that opened up a lane maybe for The Rock, because Bollywood produces more movies than Hollywood. And, you know, I'm not saying that The Rock copied anything, but it was, in my view, Dara Singh did this before The Rock. So it's a pretty interesting thing that its history's come around and started to repeat itself. But Mark Lewin, he's 82 years old, still squats 405 pounds for reps. Mark is, I'm a pretty good swimmer, I think. The only person that could outswim me in the wrestling business was Mark Lewin. He would take me places where in Honolulu, when I was living there, we'd go to the out islands. And I remember we went to this place in Kona, and we were walking down the road to go to the beach, and it said, and it had, you could replace the number. It said, "Do not swim here." And this was like in March. 8 people have drowned. And I said to Mark, "Are you sure you know what we're doing?" He said, "Don't worry about it. That's for people that don't know how to swim." And Mark used to have a statement, "I've wrung more water out of my socks than most people have seen." He took me out, and we went out about 300 yards, and I turned around, and I couldn't see the beach until the waves crested. And I said, "How do we get back?" He said, "We swim like hell, we catch a wave, and when you hit the beach, have your feet down and start running." As I'm saying this, there are trees in the water floating by us, dead trees. Mark was an incredible athlete. I mean, at 50 years old, he was benching 315 for 15 reps and then going over doing 15 chins with 50 pounds around his waist. And he at the time was 53 years old. He's an exceptional athlete. He drew money as a babyface, and then he drew money as the Maniac, and then on his tail end of the career, he drew money with me as the Purple Haze. And the interview you're talking about was one of the first interviews ever done, videos or vignettes ever done in wrestling. We were lucky we didn't plan it. The moon was full that night. Mark got in the water in Florida in February, and when he swam, but the great thing is, the narrative was done by King Curtis, and it just fell into place. And when Mark came out of the water, this is how naive we were back then. A lot of people thought, well, he didn't swim across from Singapore, but he had to be in the water for a long time, and he was. But we did it in one take. And Mark just knew how to draw money. But the other thing about Mark was, and I think he got this from Barnett, Barnett could spot talent early. Mark spotted talent early. And everywhere Mark went, he drew money. I mean, whether it was Calgary, people forget he went to Amarillo when Amarillo was down. Him and Curtis went to Amarillo. Him and Curtis went to Calgary, popped the territories. Then they went back after Jim sold Australia and ran New Zealand as a territory, and Hong Kong and Singapore and Malaysia. And I was lucky enough to be on that era with Mark, and it opened my eyes to that part of the world. That's why I say Ginger will, in the end, win out.
And I heard you tell that story about Mark taking out a group of bikers at the podcast.
We were set up. There was a promoter that bought a show that the Sheik was running, and they drew a lot of money. And the promoter, if it went over a certain amount of money, the Sheik, Sabu, myself, and Mark were supposed to get a bonus. Well, we got the bonus, but it was really reluctant. And the promoter's son said, "Oh, we own a nightclub. We want you to come to the nightclub. Now, everything's cool with us, no heat." I said, "Okay." So we went up, and then we came up the back stairs. And when we came up the back stairs, we ended up in front of the bar. So they ordered us drinks, and as they ordered us drinks, we're moving further on down the bar. So now we're where the barmaid would pick up the liquor in that little corner. So we were almost in that little corner, and then some bikers came. and they gave Mark a bunch of crap because he was the biggest, and this guy started chopping him, saying, "Oh, you're a big bastard, you're a big bastard." And a fight broke out, and Mark slugged the guy, and as the guy staggered, the guy went to get a knife, and Mark took a full bottle of beer and hit him in the back of the head, and the guy was out on his feet, and Mark kicked him down 2 flights of stairs. We made our exit, and as soon as we made our exit, the cops were there, so there was a setup. The old cop arrests me and Mark and puts us in the back of the car, and as we're driving, he says, "In Canada, MAME is a very hard crime, excuse me." And I said, "Well, boy, we're really screwed." So we get to the police station, and the head detective says, "I'll take it from here." And the old cop says, "No, I got it." He said, "No, I'll take it from here." He brought us into the room and pulled down the shades. So I said, "Oh, what's going to happen next?" And he said, "You guys did me a favor. These guys beat up my brother because I arrested one of them. They were a group of motorcycle gang." He said, "The guy you beat up my brother, and he got away with it." He said, "You did me a favor." He said, but I want you to go back to the hotel room, pack your bags, and get over the border, and don't come back." So Mark was a legitimate tough guy too, and not many people ever talk about it. Mark would have a point where, I'm not putting him in Haku's category because there's only one Haku, but Mark had that tipping point where when he tipped, there was no stopping him. And he's lucky that he didn't kill the guy, because the way he hit him with the bottle and kicked him down the stairs, the guy's lucky he was alive. I was like a passive watching all this thing happen, and I'm saying to myself, there's no way we're gonna get out of this. But the guy overstepped his bounds with the detective's brother, and that's how we got out of it.
What city would that have been in?
It was outside of Lethbridge, in between Lethbridge and Cambridge, I believe.
Ontario?
Yeah,
Oh, Cambridge, okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Not Lethbridge, it was Cambridge, and what's heading east from Cambridge?
That's a little far from where the part of Ontario where I am.
Okay.
So I know where that area
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
And you were partners with the Honky Tonk Man and...
In Knoxville.
Okay, and you also had some dealings with him in WCW, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on him?
Yeah, when I was teamed with Wayne, Wayne was a very good talent, and he got a great break as the Honky Tonk Man. I think Jimmy Hart was the guy that got Wayne in there. And, you know, he hit upon that gimmick, and it took off. And, you know, he claims he's the greatest intercontinental champion of all times, as you know. And I'm not going to say he was or wasn't, but he certainly had it for a long time, and they thought a lot of him to put him in that position. The thing about Wayne was he was always there. He was on time. He was a dependable employee, and I think they liked that. But there was great heat between him and Lawler, their cousins, and Lawler tried to bury Wayne, whether it was intentional or not, I'm not sure. But in Memphis, he treated him like somebody he didn't even know. And there had to be real heat if you don't even acknowledge your cousin, you know, or even try to help him out. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say that Wayne was right or Lawler was wrong. I don't know the details of the family background.
And we recently did a shoot interview with Barry Windham. His answers were a lot shorter than yours, to say the least. But I'm just wondering your thoughts on him.
Barry, at one time, this is how fate can intervene. in wrestling. Barry was, out of Dusty's own mouth, he was the heir apparent to be the World Heavyweight Champion. David Von Erich came to Florida, and I'll explain to you about when you became World Heavyweight Champion, you became the Missouri Champion, and then you became the Florida Champion, or vice versa. You can go back to the Funks, the Briscoes, not the Briscoes, but Jack Briscoe, Harley Race, and Barry would have been in line. From what I gather, I was in some meetings. David was going to win the belt, the Texas Stadium show, and then David would eventually drop the belt to Barry, and then eventually Barry was going to drop the belt to Magnum TA. Fate intervened with David dying, Magnum being the car wreck, and somewhere down the line, Barry and Dusty had a huge falling out. And one thing about Dusty was he demanded total loyalty, and sometimes to the extreme where he expected you to pass over money and stay loyal to him. Well, Barry went to, the WWE Rotunda, and the bar was pulled out of Florida, and Dusty left also. So maybe Rick wouldn't have been the champion 16 times, or as long as they had it, because there was 3 young guys that probably could have had the belt, and you throw Steamboat in the mix, who got it later on. There was 4 guys potentially to have the belt and swap it back and forth. Plus, Terry was still active and very active. So maybe Rick wouldn't have been the champion for as long as he was if fate didn't intervene.
And could you go into detail on your Smoky Mountain wrestling run and your thoughts on Jim Cornette?
My thoughts on Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette, people don't understand Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette categorized everything in the wrestling businesses, and you can see where he writes his books. Jim Cornette, I met Jim Cornette when he was a photographer. When I was on the booking committee, and Jim has said this, he has put me over and said that a lot of times he would do a show before we even did a show, and he'd come to me and say, "What do you think?" And I'd say, "This is a great maintenance show, Jim, but we need to do this, we need to do that." Then he got Rick Rubin, the producer, to put money up for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. The fall for Jim was they had Knoxville, and they were selling out. They had Johnson City, and they were selling out. But other than that, they had small towns. If they had gotten Chattanooga, which was 100 miles from Knoxville, if they got Cincinnati, which was 200 miles from Knoxville, if they got Louisville and Lexington, I think that Smoky Mountain Wrestling could have been in it for a lot longer than it was. I never really worked the full territory full time. I'd come in on the weekends. I was working in Japan. Jim treated me terrifically. I learned a lot from Jimmy. I actually learned from him, well, he reiterated to me, when I used the book, I believe that you put on the best match first, the best technical match, which gives energy to the building. And then you build on that, and then you get to the main event. Jim did that quite well, and I think it's a shame that Jim got disillusioned with the wrestling business, because I think if Jim wanted to, he could book for any territory in the WWE or Impact, and if you could bring Jimmy to do what he did in Smoky Mountain Wrestling and maybe harness a little bit of his old school, because times have changed, but his philosophy is still to this day applicable, I think Jim Cornette would be a big asset for them, for sure.
We also recently interviewed Missy Hyatt, and I was just wondering your thoughts on her, as well as her, I guess, longest wrestling relationship, Eddie Gilbert.
Yeah. Eddie Gilbert was a very, very smart guy. He was, what's funny was, and I've heard Lawler, it might have been one of your interviews, where Lawler said most kids want to be like their father, and Tommy was a terrific performer. But he wanted to be Jerry Lawler. He was the king, you know, and Eddie got with Paul Heyman at a young age. They were both about the same age, and they were the two brightest guys to come along in a long time. But somewhere down the line, Eddie was booking ECW, and Paul was put in Eddie's position by the owner of ECW. And that caused a huge rift with Paul and Eddie. And I don't think Eddie ever got over that. And then he went to Puerto Rico, and he had burnt a few bridges. And like in Georgia one time, we lived in the same apartment complex, and he left without giving us notice. And at the time, Jim Barnett was really strong in the wrestling business. And then when he went to Watts, Eddie did a great job, but he had a problem with Bill, and somewhere down the line, things blew up. I think Eddie had a mind, like I've said before. We've talked about Brian Pillman as a performer, but the sad thing is, if we talked about wrestling feuds, we would have started and stopped with Austin and Pillman. Pillman was, people talk about, well, they went over the line, they went over the line with the gun, right? But everybody remembers it. And Pillman was not a giant, but he was over because he could think outside the box. Like I told you what he wanted to do. He wanted to use, when the Bengals were at the Super Bowl, he had sideline passes because he played for them. He wanted to run out naked and chain himself to the goalpost during the Super Bowl. Well, that would have made national publicity. He was just thought outside the box. And one of the biggest compliments I ever got in my life, Kevin Nash told me that when we did the angle, me and Brian, that a bunch of guys from WWE bought that pay-per-view to see if it was a shoot between me and Pillman. So that wasn't my idea. I like to take credit for it, but it wasn't. I was just listening to what Brian wanted to do. And we would call each other every night, and he'd add another layer, and another layer, and another layer. If I had anything to do, it was keeping a straight face with Brian. And maybe I added 2%, but that was all Brian's, and that's how smart the guy was.
And for Missy Hyatt?
Missy, I think used Eddie. We don't know, and I'm not one to say this is what happened, because I don't know. But it seemed to me that after Missy, Eddie started to go downhill, because I believe he was really in love with her, and whatever happened between them, Eddie was never the same afterwards.
There's a lot of rumors around on the internet and stuff that you and Steve Austin didn't get along. What was your relationship like when you guys were in WCW together?
I was in a booking committee. We put the Hollywood Blondes together. I thought Steve Austin, and I still say this, Steve Austin saved the WWE. Unfortunately, nobody on the booking committee saw Steve Austin. He was stunning Steve Austin. We didn't see Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, if we did, we certainly made a huge mistake. And I don't think Flair, being the head of the booking committee at the time, would have made that mistake if he thought Steve Austin was going to be what he was. People make mistakes all the time. I remember one time getting on a plane with The Rock, and this is when he was getting booed out of the building. And I said to him, "Hey, I was at your grandfather's second memorial. You guys know how to work. Don't worry about it. Eventually they're going to change." Because he was so charismatic, in my opinion, even when he was in the Nation of Domination. If Austin had came back as Stone Cold and The Rock had came back as Stone Cold, I don't know if they could have taken that barrage. They would have had two great performers left, meaning The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. But ours was so stacked with Hogan, Savage, NWO, Rey Mysterio, Guerrero, Malenko, Benoit. It goes down the line. I don't think that WWE could have taken that onslaught with just two. And the other thing was, Austin had the best heel at that time to work with, and that was Vince McMahon. And here's something that someone brought up to me, and I forgot about it. Would Vince have done that if Eric Bischoff didn't turn heel? And I gotta give Eric a lot of credit on this. When he turned heel, they powerbombed him through a stage. Yeah, there was padding underneath. But if you've never taken that move, you gotta have a lot of moxie to do it. And Eric did it. And I think that was the catalyst for Vince saying, I'm gonna follow what they're doing.
And when you did the gimmick where you turned the Equalizer into Dave Sullivan and made him your brother, what are your thoughts on how that went?
Well, that wasn't my idea. That was Dusty's idea, because I wasn't even working there full time. I was working on a nightly deal with them, and I was still working in Japan. The idea was, you couldn't do it today, and I don't think it really in the long run helped him, and I don't think it helped me, and I don't think it helped the business, but it was the catalyst of everybody being enthralled with Hogan, because then, he used to say he was a Hulkamaniac, and I would slap him and say, "You're not a Hulkamaniac." But in today's day and age, people wouldn't buy it. And I don't think that it was fair to Dave either, because he was a talent, he was a wonderful human being. Became a coach at Nebraska. Great guy, I don't think he got the credit. And I think as the equalizer, he could have been upper middle card and drawn some money.
And can you elaborate on your personal experiences with Jose Gonzalez when you guys were both in WWWF?
Yeah, I was there the night when the heat started with Brody and him. We were in Lowell, Massachusetts, and Gonzalez was supposed to put Brody over. And Monsoon, for some reason, was at that town that night. He usually didn't go into the New England area because he lived in New Jersey, and that time the territory was almost split. There was the New England end, and then the, we'll say, the Philadelphia, New Jersey, Baltimore end. In fact, I'll give you an example. I lived in Boston at the time, and one night I looked at my bookings, and I was Friday night in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and North Attleboro, Massachusetts was the longest running town in the history of wrestling. Ran for like 55 years every Friday night. And I wasn't on there, and I usually was on there. And I guess I had the balls enough at the time. I went to Vince Sr. and I said, I'm not in North Attleboro, and the payoffs are going to be pretty the same, and I'm driving 300 miles. Am I out of line here? He said, no, I missed that, so he put me there. But I was there that night in Lowell, and things didn't go the way Brody wanted, and he slapped Gonzalez around in the ring, and he confronted him, and Jose started yelling, Eno, 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 and Monsoon came over there and squashed the heat. But my thought is that was the seed that sowed the horrible incident that happened later. I don't think Jose ever got over him being manhandled by Brody.
Yeah, according to Tony Atlas, he was also on that card that night, and I guess Gonzalez was driving with him and SD Jones after, and according to Tony, he said that he actually wanted to felt like killing him over that. So you never know. You mentioned Monsoon and Brody. There was some incident with Monsoon and Brody, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Were you there for that?
I was there, but I didn't see it. I was in a different town, but I think it was because Monsoon had bought into the Puerto Rican territory, and at one time, I don't know if the deal went through, but Jose and Monsoon and what's the promoter over there that ran in IWA, the guy that died, Puerto Rican.
Oh, Victor Quinones.
Victor Quinones was going to buy into a hotel. So for some reason, Monsoon would work in Puerto Rico, so he had a connection with those guys, and I think it was Monsoon stood up for a lot of the Hispanic boys, and I think the thing was, hey, don't slap my guy around, and Brody stood up to Monsoon.
Okay, so it may have been over that particular incident.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that run that you had in WWWF? Because a lot of people don't realize that you actually had a lot of success there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you something that I didn't realize how I was Haystack Calhoun's partner, but in a lot of the clubs, I would wrestle in a handicap tag match with Andre. So I had to run there, and I also, my position was at the time to get the guy ready for Bruno. Like I got Hanson ready, I got Brody ready. But on the other aspect, in the Boston towns, like when Spirits was leaving, Arion, I'd slip over him. I would out and out go over Cicluna. The secondary guys like Pete Sanchez, Johnny Rods, they kept me in a good spot to do my job to get guys ready for Bruno. I got to wrestle Billy and I got to wrestle Ivan, and one of the things I'll never forget was Ivan and Billy, as you know, were going to go to California, open up a company, and Haystacks and I were wrestling on TV on their last TV, and Vince wanted them to go over, and which was rightfully so, and they were going to beat me. And during the match, Billy said, "We're going to put you over." Well, we went over in a count out or something, but you know, when we got back to the dressing room, I heard what happened, and Billy and Ivan stood up and said, "Hey, we're going. These guys needed to go over." And they could have thrown me under the bus, but they didn't. They were two outstanding guys. And later on, Billy and Ivan and I worked quite a bit together.
And what are your thoughts on UFC having a match with CM Punk, who's 0-1, against another 0-1 guy coming up? Obviously, that's a big marketing reason rather than sport, but do you think they're going to start doing more of those gimmick type matches?
Well, here's the thing, and you know better than I, so correct me. I think that them losing Brock, Ronda losing 2 in a row, Jones having the problem that he's had, they've lost some drawing power, and they would like nothing better. And I don't know CM Punk very much. I was on a tag match one time with him on a Comic-Con. It was me, him, and I think Barry Windham me, him, and Abdullah against Barry, Kendall, and Barry, Dusty, and Dustin. And I thought he was a great performer, but now he's in a different position. And I certainly think it would behoove them for him to win this match, because like you said, Ronda's crossed over to wrestling. And, Brock has won, right? He kept the title, and everybody thought he was going to lose.
Yeah.
Do you think that, and Dana said he's going to fight?
Oh, we've actually been interviewing UFC guys this week. He is going to get a title fight against whoever wins the next heavyweight.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he is going to fight, right?
We got confirmation on that.
Okay. Do you think that he will go over and fight with the WWE belt on him? Because it would be a great marketing tool for both of them if that looks like there's going to be some kind of cross promotion. And I think the only reason why they would do that, they just sold the company for $4 billion. I may be wrong, but you tell me, having their ratings come down?
I actually heard it from a UFC person yesterday that business is not where it's not bad, but it's not where they want it to be.
Right, and I think it's like Vince got Ronda, and she made a big impact, and my hat's off to her. I watched her match for the first time out of the box. I got to give Stephanie and Hunter all the credit in the world. They carried her. I got to give Angle the credit. I mean, they made her, for the short time she's been training, they made her look like she should be there. Now, if Punk wins this one, and I think he will, it gives a little light to the fire for them. And if he could win a couple more, like I told you, my family's been in the boxing business since the first glove heavyweight champion and the last bare knuckle champion. My cousins fought Floyd Patterson for the title, Tom, and his son fought Tyson when Tyson first came out of prison. I see where they could cross over pretty well and not confuse the people what's real and what's not with UFC. But it would certainly give a bounce to both of them. And now with Conor McGregor, they're talking about him fighting Floyd Mayweather. It's like, it reminds me of the old WrestleManias when they brought Mr. T in and different things like that. I think it's be good for both business, but I think UFC really needs a shot in the arm, because I used to be a huge watcher of UFC, and now I catch it now and then. But there doesn't seem to be anybody but Conor that's drawing money right away. So I think they need somebody to draw some money. And the other thing is, I think Ronda could fight again. And if they put her in with a show with Brock on top, her with someone she could handle, and CM Punk with somebody he could handle, it would really help both companies.
And what do you think about, I didn't see WrestleMania, but I read the reports on what happened, and I guess they had like a fourth grader in a tag team championship.
Let me tell you, I thought that over really hard. And if they were going to sell the company, nobody thinks they'll ever sell, but everything's for sale. There's a price tag on anything. One time I have a friend of mine that's a billionaire in England. He patented the VIN numbers on cars. He owns Identicar, 144 franchises around the world. And he has this beautiful palace, and I go to it I try to go every year on Thanksgiving. We created like a little Thanksgiving in Marara, Spain, so we have friends over. And he lives on top of a mountain that overlooks the Calpe Rock, the second largest rock in the world, next to Gibraltar in the water. And I said, John, this is the most incredible view in the world. He said, don't ever fall in love with a view, because you can sell something. And what I'm saying about that tag match was, if they were going to sell it to anybody, they would sell it to Disney. And think about this. I thought what they did in that match was a script for a movie. That the movie is a Disney movie where the kid wanted to be a wrestler. He befriends Braun, and Braun teaches him to wrestle, and there's the story. They got a story if they ever sold it to Disney. And I think people are going to say, that's crazy. But if you're going to sell it to somebody, you just opened the door for them and gave them a story, and they would buy it. Because why I say this, that was 180 degrees different than the main event, where supposedly there's no blood in WWE. You've been around the block, that wasn't just an elbow that did that. And it was like, okay, we did this to show them we could do this, but this is what our fans want, because, and I don't believe that there was an audible call. I think they knew Brock was going to win. I think Brock had signed before, and the more I hear about what happened in Saudi Arabia, the spear through the cage, but Brock still won. They're trying to make Roman climb up the mountain, the 12 labors of Hercules, and overcome all odds. So I think they covered themselves pretty well, whether they were to sell the company or they just threw out, in fishing, they just threw out the false bait.
Now, you used to be a power lifter. What are some of your best powerlifting numbers?
Well, I was never good at the bench, but I was a pretty good squatter on television at TBS. I squatted 425 for 26 reps at 190, but I've done an 800 at 242. So, but I trained with Doug Furness, who was the first guy to break 1,000 pounds. He broke it. I saw him in training do 1,004 pounds with no belt, no wraps, and squatted 2 reps. So the powerlifting was that. My bench was 405 at best, but I was a pretty good deadlifter too. When I was 61, I did 575. After I did 525, 5 reps. So, you know, some of it is like, you're a powerlifter, but you know, with long arms, I got an advantage on, and height-wise, I got an advantage on deadlifting, but I don't have the advantage on powerlifting because I don't have that leverage. So, yeah.
I've heard a couple stories of Hugh Morris talking about his time in WCW, and I guess at one point he was involved in taking a van for a joyride with one of the Public Enemy, and there was another incident, I guess, where he got too drunk, so he missed the show, so you made him wrestle something like 12 times.
No, I didn't. That was a funny story. He called me, and I called him. I said, "Where are you?" Because he lived in Cocoa Beach. I said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm too drunk to come to the show. I'm too hungover." I said, "Okay." I didn't make him wrestle 12 times, but that day. But the next day, the next 2 days, I made him wrestle 8 times. I made him wrestle every taping we had. You know what I mean? But I said, when he called me, he said, "Am I fired?" I said, "No, you told the truth. See you tomorrow." Well, he thought he was off the hook, right? But hey, he missed it, so he got his hand slapped. It was no big thing. Bill and I were very good friends. I brought him in because I was on a tour in Japan and saw him. I actually saw him do the moonsault for the first time. He was afraid to do it. We got a mat, rolled it up, and he did it perfectly. And then, yeah.
And this thing where they took the van, and I guess they got fired briefly, and then it was overturned.
Yeah, it was. You had to know Johnny. He was a wonderful guy, but you know that was a different era, and it was they were party animals, not unlike somebody else I know, but they would go out and do crazy shit. And everybody was doing crazy shit. But they went out, and Rocco actually went out to be the voice of reason and talk him out of it. He jumped in the car and saying, "You can't do that." And the next thing, he peeled out and he got fired over it. But I think he paid whatever damage was done to the van, and he got his hand slapped for a while, and he was back.
So it was a very different time.
Yes.
You were involved with bringing the Giant into WCW, I guess.
No, this was Hogan's boy. Hogan saw him and brought him in. But how could you say no to this guy? He was, you know, he was not just a Giant. He was an athlete. He was a very good basketball player. And Hogan wanted to recreate the biggest card of all times, him and the Giant. He thought he could do it and came damn near close with the guy. The guy's had a terrific run. And now, as he aged, look what he looks like. He looks completely different. I said to myself the other day when I saw him, I said, can you imagine if he started like this? He might have been champion forever.
Were you around when Sid and Arn Anderson had their fight?
No, I wasn't. I was still working part-time for WCW, and when I heard about it, I mean, that was, you know, it's been kind of glossed over, but I mean, they're lucky nobody died. I mean, they both got stabbed in the neck and the chest and the leg. I mean, I've heard multiple stories about it, but the only two that really know what happened are Sid and Arn, and you're going to hear one side that's Sid's, one side that's Arn. But what was I gotta give Arn a lot of credit. When they were gonna sign Sid, they asked Arn if he was cool with it, and he said, yeah. So a lot of guys would have held it against, so I gotta say that Arn's a big man.
What was Sid like to deal with in WCW?
I had a wonderful relationship with Sid Vicious. If you told Sid straight up what was gonna happen, he would go along with it. As long as you didn't bullshit him. I mean, he put Benoit over for me in the middle of the ring with the crossface. And he didn't want to do it. He did not want to do it. I mean, I was in the room. I went to the room with him and me by myself with him, and we talked. And he had every reason in the world to tell me why he didn't want to do it. And I said, well, it's this kid's time. And he said, I'll do it. And he could have went to somebody else, and some of his other faction, not just Eric, he could have went and maybe would have been overturned. But he was, to me, easy to work with.
And why is it that you never signed with WWE after WCW closed? Because it seems like they would have approached you.
I had a 3-year contract. I was an employee with Turner. And I had just signed a 3-year contract as a attorney. I mean, for my attorney, just signed a 3-year deal for me. So I was getting all the benefits still. I had health care, and I had bonuses coming to me that they had to pay me. And then after that, there was one meeting, and I probably didn't present myself the way I should have, and it dissipated, and I never went back. But I did talk to Vince and give him finishes sometimes, like when Hogan won the belt. I gave him that finish the last time Hogan won the belt.
He just called you up and asked your advice?
No, we started talking. Hogan's, when he went back, said, hey, you got some good ideas. What do you think? I said, you're alley at the end of the career. We don't want to see you lose. And he said, would you mind telling Vince that? And I called Vince, and we talked a couple of times. Very nice guy to me on the phone. It only went that far. And I was also had 2 businesses, and I was doing well, and I was living in Florida, living a normal life, and I was happy.
What are your thoughts on the changes in Impact Wrestling and the direction they're going now?
I think the changes are fabulous. I think that anything they did just as a change could have sank them, but they're kind of trying to get back on track. And I got to give whoever's booking it, or how many guys are booking it, I think they're also listening to some of the talent. I mean, I go to PCW Ultra every month, and some of the guys that have been headlining at PCW, Penta is now the champion. Sammy Callahan is in PCW, and he's doing quite well there. And then there's Johnny Morrison, or Johnny, what do they call him? Johnny Mundo.
Johnny Impact. Or
Johnny Impact. I mean, there's some great talent there. So I would like to see them get a little more talent. A guy like you should be there. I would like to see just a little bit more of the big man stuff, along with the smaller man stuff. I think they need to get some big guys in there, so it isn't just a high spot fest. I think they need a Brock Lesnar type guy to add some credibility. And they just lost Bobby, who I don't think they handled quite right at the end. But if they had a couple, like we'll say you and somebody else that has been off TV or is brand new and came over, and they were two bulls banging at each other, and then what else they put down with Sammy and Penta and Johnny. They got a very good core.
Last time, and it's on the internet for anyone that wants to watch, you covered the whole death of your ex-wife and the whole Chris Benoit thing, so anyone can look that up. But Fam wanted me to ask just some specific memories of Nancy managing you and that relationship, because it was a good pairing when you guys were together.
Yeah, I mean, we started off as friends, and we became more than friends. And I think she doesn't get the credit she deserves. She was a forerunner to the Divas, and she was one step past that. You know, it was like shock. And she knew how to handle herself in the ring without wrestling. And the girls now today, who kind of almost the headliners now, got to look back and give people their due, like a Sherry Martel, a Luna, Nancy. I think she was brilliant at what she did.
Any stories about Danny Spivey from your time managing him?
Danny was probably one of the straight up guys you'd ever want to meet in your life. There was no gray area with Danny. And I hear he's doing very well for himself now, and I'm glad to see it. I'm gonna give you a question, and you think about this. Danny Spivey was over in the WWE, right?
As Waylon Mercy?
No, before, when it was Danny Spivey, right?
Yeah.
But he looked too much like Hulk Hogan. And I think that's what hurt him. And when he came back as Wailing, I think that no matter how they can camouflage people, people still remember who you are. And I think, you know, Danny Spivey, if you talk to Stan Hansen, I just saw Stan just recently, we were talking, and we were out to dinner at funny as it sounds, we were in California, we were out to a Japanese restaurant, and we were talking about Japan, and Joey Kabibo brought up Dan Spivey, and Stan said he was one of the greatest partners he ever had. So that praise coming from Stan Hansen, coming from Japan, means the guy was exceptionally good, because Stan had Brody and he had Dr. Death, people forget, and he also had Danny, and for him to point out that Danny was as good of a partner as he had, and or enjoyed Danny, says something what Danny's ability was.
What did you think of Dr. Death, speaking of him?
Oh, Dr. Death. I used to shake my head. Doc would be sitting there, 300 pounds, and he had vascularity in his legs. I mean, this guy was the real deal. And I enjoyed my time with Steve, because he was such a lover of life. You know, he loved his family, and he would tell raunchy stories, and we would laugh and jokes, but when it came to bell time, he was a racehorse. And it's a sad thing, a guy passing that young.
And last question here, because I know you got a show to do. What's your best booking advice for like an independent company that wants to become more of a territory?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I've been saying this. You are on the right track. You got to expand the die. Paul E. Let's go back to Paul E. Paul E. was a student of mine. I broke him in the business. Paul E. did something very smart. He brought championship wrestling from Florida to ECW. Everybody thinks about ECW, Blood and Death. The main event was Shane Douglas and Taz, Bigelow and Shane, Taz and Bigelow. There was always wrestling. But Paul E. could cover guys up like 911. I got the choke slam for the Giant watching Paul E. do 911. He covered guys up that couldn't really perform. Plus he had Rocco Rock, he had Johnny Grunge. People who came through there, Steve Austin. But what made Paul eventually successful was they got out of Philadelphia and they got out of the Northeast and started traveling Chicago, Florida, Detroit. And I'm not saying that you can do that at the beginning, but if you're doing successful in one town, that means you should be able to transfer that to another town 100 miles or 200 miles away. My belief is to get on the map, it's like a spoke in a wheel, and you have a main town and everything works off that town. Like in Canada for years, Montreal, they ran that whole area. Toronto, when it was a territory, ran that whole area. Calgary ran that area. And back in those days, they weren't much different, or probably not as good a talent as there is on your shows today. So I think an independent show, the other thing is it can't be WWE light. You gotta give the people something different, but you also have to give them the high flyers. You have to give them the girls that can really wrestle. You have to give them good tag matches. You have to give them a little lucha libre, but you have to have a big guy, I believe. A guy that when we talked about Bruno originally, a guy that walks down the aisle and the people say he's a pro wrestler.
All right, well, thank you very much for giving us all your thoughts. And speaking of Great North Wrestling, looks like we'll probably see you in Great North Wrestling maybe this summer 2018. So maybe some of the fans watching this will get to meet you, and maybe you'll even do a seminar.
I'm really looking forward to it because I've been following your stuff for a long time, and you do have a unique pulse on this business. And I've talked to Superstar about you before, and he says he's the only guy that I know of that really gets today's wrestling and what needs to be done. So you come highly recommended by a very dear friend of mine that to me, should have been the world's champion for a lot longer.
Yes, that's a very sad situation, unfortunately. And anyone watching this, Superstar Billy Graham actually has a GoFundMe account, and he needs an operation. So if you go to his Facebook page, he has a Facebook page, and you could look up how to support him on GoFundMe. And is there any final thought you want to give us?
Yeah, Hannibal said it all. This is a guy that gave you everything, meaning Superstar Billy Graham. If you're a wrestling fan, please give back to him because he deserves it.